episode 75 of the Real World Wellness Podcast. Hi everyone, I'm Christine Lehman, a nutritional therapy practitioner and the reverse diabetes coach, which is also the name of my website. I see clients in person and remotely, and I'm accepting a limited number of clients starting in March. You can reach me using my contact form or christine@reversediabetescoach.com. Please remember while you're listening to the show, advice and information we provide is intended to be helpful and informative, but is not a substitute for medical advice or treatment. I am really delighted to welcome Dr. Sarah Ballantyne to the podcast today. Sarah is the creator of the award-winning online resource, the Paleo Mom, co-host of the syndicated top-rated The Paleo View podcast, the New York Times bestselling author of the Paleo Approach, and the Paleo Approach Cookbook, and the Healing Kitchen. And she has also created the online program, Go to Bed. And we'll be talking about all this today. Sarah earned her doctorate degree in medical biophysics at the age of 26 and spent the next 4 years doing research on critical care medicine, innate immunity, gene therapy, and cell biology, earning a variety of awards for research excellence along the way. Sarah's transition from academic researcher to stay-at-home mom to award-winning and internationally recognized health advocate and educator was driven by her own health journey, which we'll talk about more in a minute. As a scientist, both by training and by nature, Sarah is deeply interested in understanding how the foods we eat interact with our gut barriers, immune systems, and hormones to influence health. Sarah's innate curiosity goes further than just understanding diet, and she's also deeply interested in the impact of lifestyle factors like sleep, stress, and activity. Her passion for scientific literacy and her talent for distilling scientific concepts into straightforward and accessible explanations form the foundation of her work and her dedication to improving public health. So welcome, Sarah.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Christine.
Oh, you're very welcome. So one of the things that I always like to ask at the beginning of the podcast is, what is your health journey? What led to your current interest in autoimmune disorders?
Well, I mean, it was having them myself, undiagnosed, for most of my, post-puberty life, and really struggling with my health and feeling like it was my fault, like I was a failure. You know, I was morbidly obese, and it felt like nothing I did worked, and I ended up feeling so defeated. And so it was really easy to then just throw in the towel, right? Well, if it doesn't matter, you know, how strict I am with my food intake, my weight's never going to change, then what does it matter what I eat? I might as well eat all the yummy things I want to eat. And of course, it does still matter, and, you know, that ended up derailing things further. And it was a long road for me to really discover answers and really understand that, you know, my weight gain was a symptom of an autoimmune disease called Hashimoto's thyroiditis.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't my fault, that there was, you know, some mechanisms happening in my body that were at the root of this symptom, and it wasn't because I was failing at life. And finding solutions to, you know, both, you know, functional medicine type approaches, but also, you know, complementary changes in diet, changes in lifestyle, and really honing in on supplying my body with the nutrients that my immune system needs to function properly, and really digging deep into what I need to do to be healthy. And then also, because I have this science background, I don't do anything without nerding out about it, is pretty much how that works. So, you know, as I got more into the science of, you know, why is gluten such a destructive food for me? Why is sleep such a vital part of my health? You know, as I started really wanting to understand the whys behind these things, in part because it motivates me, right? So understanding the science behind something helps me actually make that better choice. Mm-hmm. And in part because I'm just naturally that curious. And then I started going like, well, I was struggling with this for 30 years before I got a diagnosis.
Wow.
Why did I have 2 autoimmune skin conditions, why did I never have a doctor tell me that those were autoimmune diseases? Why did I never have a doctor do a complete thyroid panel on me? And then, when I did get answers, like, why is the resources for patients so limited to, take this, steroid or this disease-modifying drug, like take this painkiller, maybe take this hormone replacement, but like the resources are so pitiful. And as I was digging into these answers, I started to get really sort of activist. It tickled my inner activist about like this information needs to be accessible for people. Like if we can make really simple changes to our diets and to our lifestyles to mitigate these diseases, and that doesn't mean throwing out all the medications necessarily, but it means reducing our need for them, and maybe being able to eliminate them, or certainly some of them. If it means that we can stop developing a new autoimmune disease every decade on average in our lives, this is really important information to be out there. And I ended up feeling very indignant that this wasn't information that was easily accessible by patients, and yet there's so much science that's been done. And I felt like, as a person with both the personal experience of just really struggling with autoimmune disease, the symptoms of autoimmune disease, and the psychological challenges of having an autoimmune disease, and then, through my scientific background, being able to eventually find my way to a really healing diet and healing lifestyle choices, I felt like it was my obligation then to figure out a way of sharing this information with the world in a way that people don't need, to be medical researchers like I was in order to be able to understand. And I really firmly believe that, people are smarter than they're often given credit for by science writers and health writers. And I really feel like when you, it's called dumbing things down.
Right.
I mean, just that term is offensive.
Right. Well, they're aiming at it for a 7th grade education.
Right. So when you simplify things to that level that has sort of been historically done in health books and dietary guidelines, and even like the quick little 20 seconds of dietary advice that your doctor will give you, because that's a lot of time out of your 5-minute appointment, I feel like you miss the heart of that information, and you don't actually provide enough information to fully motivate choices. And I think that when we have this sort of broader scientific understanding of the physiology, right, the mechanisms of disease and the mechanisms of health, and it doesn't require, a college degree in science, but once we can have a bigger understanding of why this food's a good choice, why this food's a bad choice, why sleep is important, why stress management's important, why activity is important, and which are the best choices when it comes to those things, it's so much easier to make the healthier choice. When we're just given this set of rules, and the rules that most people are given are inaccurate anyways, but we're just given this set of rules, right? It's so easy. I mean, if you don't understand why a rule's a rule, you're not, and there's no, the police officer's not going to pull you over for eating a bagel. They might pull you over for speeding, but, there's no accountability other than how you feel. And so without really understanding where those guidelines come from, it makes it really challenging to actually follow them. And if you can't follow them, then you can't get to that other side where you're feeling better enough that you start to understand them from a much more instinctual level. So it just became my mission to provide this information for people, and to provide the information not just from a, don't eat this, eat this.
Right.
Really the whys, and really tackle it from a, almost like I consider myself a science translator. So I take all the scientific papers and I put them together in a complete story, and then I distill it to what's actionable for people. And it just became my, I guess it's sort of like an activism type, this is my way that I'm protesting. This is information that people need. And I'd like to even be able to extend sort of beyond the autoimmune community and just talk about healthy choices in general for people, because I think there's so much misinformation out there, even within sort of alternative health and alternative diet communities. When people are actively looking for better answers, there's still so much pseudoscience and misinformation, and it's offensive to me that accurate answers are so hard for people to find. And so,
well, let me ask you a question about that. Right, because, there's a lot of funding. I've been a healthcare reporter for many years, so I used to cover the funding of like the National Institutes of Health and all the different federal agencies, and there's plenty of funding for conventional medicine and research, but even though they would argue it's still not enough. But when it comes to more holistic approaches, and particularly diet and food and things that are not drugs, there just doesn't seem to be anywhere near the funding. And I've thought about this because I would like to see more research behind, what we do. I would love to see longitudinal studies, with the population approach to the paleo diet. And there might be, I know there's whatever is out there, I've looked at what Rob Wolf does and Chris Kresser, and I've tried to, bring it into my blog as well. But I just feel compared to, other areas of science, this is really, we need more funding. And I was just wondering what your thought is.
I mean, I really think that basic science needs more funding in general. There's right now in biological research, there is this priority in funding research that is monetizable. So it's funding translational research, biomedical research. So it's things that are going to end in a drug or a technology.
Right, exactly.
And it's because there's so little funding for basic sciences. I mean, this is the way that a university, for example, might round out a grant, because they know that grant is for research that has a high likelihood of leading to a patent, and that's good for the university. And then if that patent becomes something monetizable, then the university is going to get a cut. And I think that over focus on only funding research that you can see what the applications are is missing out on a very big point, which is that our pharmacological advances, our technological advances, I mean, this is across not just biology and medical research, but it's also across chemistry and physics and astronomy. Our current advances are based on research that was purely theoretical from 30, 40, 50 years ago. And if you stop funding that research that is really just about increasing human understanding of our universe, then you castrate our ability to make technological advances in the future. And you have to think forward, maybe understanding this particular, one biological pathway, or, this thing to do with black holes. I mean, it can see we've got this sort of theory across all fields of science. It can be hard to see what the applications are going to be now. But just because we can't see what the applications are going to be doesn't mean that that's not worthy knowledge to pursue. But the only way to really fund that basic pursuit of knowledge is with government granting programs, which have their budgets cut really, really dramatically over the last 20 years. From the point where, in the 80s, grant applications were being approved and funded at sort of 25 to 30%. So, you might have to apply a few times to get your grant funded, and each time you'd apply, you'd refine, and you would improve the quality of your grant. Once it hit that, that mark of this is, a quality question, a quality design, then it would get funded. Now granting agencies are funding at the 6 to 7% range, which means that people who are doing really high quality research might never get funded. And the research that is the least funded is the stuff that's just, for the sake of understanding a system better. And so when it comes to something like understanding, I would love to see a study that compares different variations of the paleo diet to themselves, and maybe pits them against a plant-based diet, a Mediterranean diet, right? American Diabetes Association dietary guidelines, and looks at quantifiable numbers with blood work and what other neat things you can do with body composition or other sort of vital signs, markers of health.
Right.
Right, and get into some nitty gritty about macronutrient ratios and fiber content, and I think that would be fascinating. Do it as a 10-year study and look at disease rates in addition to things that you can measure in blood like cardiovascular disease risk factors.
Right, even weight loss. Yeah.
But the end result of that research is being able to form better U.S. dietary guidelines that will hopefully, over a 10 or 20-year period, decrease the burden on the healthcare system. It requires so much forethought to fund that research. And those types of studies are really expensive. And so it isn't right now. There isn't, the healthcare problem that we have, in all Western countries really, hasn't hit that critical point yet where people are looking at prevention, at least sufficiently enough to want to throw money at studies that start to get into dietary minutia like that. It's so much easier to just do some kind of broad epidemiological study that goes, hey, what did you eat yesterday? Okay, and what are your, how much heart disease is in your family? Okay, great. I'm going to make some kind of sweeping generalization based on that.
Right.
So I really just feel that science in general is underfunded, and the scientists who are really interested in answering these very basic questions about human health are unfortunately the ones that are having the hardest time getting adequate grant funding. And I like seeing, there's more and more science that's being crowdsourced. And that I think is really, really exciting. Let's just bypass the system altogether and appeal to the people who really care about whether or not the science is done, and ask for, $5 or $10, and then enough people donate, and that adds up. And it's almost become like a grassroots, retaliation to the funding system right now. But I just generally think that as average citizens, the best thing that we can do is, use our voices to say we care about science. We can do that by engaging with, science news sites, with websites that really care about quality science in their writing, and we can do that by just the same old stuff of letting our Congress people or representatives know, I care about scientific funding. I don't want to see NIH or NSF funding get slashed, and especially because that is something that has been put on the table for the next budget. So letting our voices be heard in that regard, I think, is really important.
Absolutely. And, one of the centers within NIH is they changed the name. It used to be the Center for Alternative Complementary Medicine, and now it's the Center for Integrative Health. And, they might be a place where, this kind of study could be done. So.
Well, and they have done some really interesting studies since they were established that have looked at a lot of alternative diet claims, and some they've completely debunked, which I think is amazing too.
Right.
And some that they've verified, and I think that their budget, clearly when you look at really how many missing pieces of knowledge we have in terms of optimal diet. We've got a lot of foods that are like clear winners, and we've got a lot of foods that are clearly not helping anybody. And then there's this whole range of gray in the middle where we've got some indication that it might be beneficial, they've got some compelling signaling nutrients, and then you've got some other potentially problematic compounds, maybe some things that are inflammatory or that feed one type of bacteria in the gut. And, we need to be looking at those foods more carefully. And then you can go beyond that and start looking at, right? And I think actually they've done a great job so far looking at a lot of herbal supplements, botanicals.
Yeah, that I've seen a lot.
Those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what they seem to be focusing a lot on lately, at least. So I use them too as a resource in my writing. So let's talk about autoimmune disorders. First of all, can you give us a quick primer?
Yeah, so our immune systems their job is to defend us from foreign invaders. And that foreign invader could be a virus, a bacteria, a parasite, dirt, anything that doesn't belong inside our bodies. So our immune systems are what are responsible for fighting off a flu virus, but also healing from a cut or a sliver. And it's a very intricate, complicated system. There's a lot of different cell types that each have their own job. They communicate with each other with dozens of different chemicals that each send a different type of message. There's cells that coordinate, right? The immune system has its own little micromanagers. There's cells whose whole job it is to just keep the immune system reined in so it doesn't get, way out of control. And that's like a critical part of us surviving life on this planet. What happens in autoimmune disease is the ability of the immune system to differentiate at least one protein in our body from a foreign invader fails. So the immune system sort of starts to see something in our own bodies as the same thing as a virus or a bacteria, something that needs to be attacked and gotten rid of. And that is an accident that actually happens probably in all of us several times in our lives. It's just chance that really causes that to happen, although there are some genetic factors that may increase the probability of it happening in some people. But what happens in autoimmune disease is we've got these fail-safes that are designed to detect that accident when it happens and shut it down. In autoimmune disease, that fail-safe also fails. So we have this accident of, I'm going to see the thyroid as being some foreign invader that needs to be attacked and destroyed, and those parts of the immune system that are supposed to regulate, make sure that I don't attack, my own body, and make sure that I don't get crazy stimulated out of control, those mechanisms all fail as well. And so what happens is you have a loss of being able to differentiate what's called self from non-self. So I see my thyroid or adrenal glands or neural tissues, whatever it is, skin tissues, as being the same thing as a foreign invader. I'm going to attack it. The immune system gets stimulated and can't turn itself off very well, and then damage builds up in that tissue to the point of being symptomatic. And so that is when it's called an autoimmune disease, is when there are symptoms. And there's no one, test that can be done to detect autoimmune disease. There are some autoimmune diseases that testing can be done very reliably, and there's some where they really can only diagnose it once the pattern of symptoms has gotten, severe enough that you can go, aha, this must be, this autoimmune disease. And unfortunately, those are autoimmune diseases that are only diagnosed when people are extremely ill. So it's frustrating because, upwards of half of people who are later diagnosed with very severe autoimmune diseases are labeled as hypochondriacs in the early phases of their disease. And it's because the symptoms can be very amorphous. So symptoms that we sort of see across the board with autoimmune disease typically are things like fatigue and low energy. We see gastrointestinal symptoms fairly commonly. We see skin symptoms fairly commonly. We see depression and mood disorders fairly commonly. Things like what's called brain fog, so just inhibited cognition and memory. And these are things that, you don't have to have all of those with an autoimmune disease, but we kind of see them fairly commonly across, many, many different autoimmune diseases. And so it can be very frustrating when you just go to the doctor and like, I'm tired all the time, I don't know why.
Did that happen to you?
Joint pain, right, is another very common one.
Mm-hmm. Did that happen to you? When you?
Yes, many times. So, I was going to the doctor and saying, look, I am exercising 20 hours a week, and I'm counting all of my calories, and I'm still gaining weight, and I'm basically, if I'm not, exercising or at school, I'm sleeping because I'm so tired, and I have, these other symptoms, right? Like my skin is dry. Can we do some testing? Can we figure what this is? And they'll say sure, and they'll run some, really oversimplified blood work, and they'll come back and be like, your blood work's fine. And then I've just become some hysterical female who, is just stressed out and should just, take it easy. And so I started complaining about symptoms. They started around age 10 or 11, and I started complaining about them around age 13 or 14. I had twice in my 20s, I had a doctor run a very simplified thyroid panel where they just look at T4 and TSH, and my numbers came back. My T4 was on the bottom of the lab range, but it wasn't low, and my TSH was at the top of the lab range, but it wasn't high. And so they just said, we'll watch this, and no one ever did, and no one ever did more detailed testing, which of course was when I finally found a functional medicine specialist who did the detailed testing. It's like, oh, and you have antibodies in your body of your immune system attacking your thyroid. Like, we can see that this is happening, and this is diagnostic for Hashimoto's. Great, that's, I now have this answer for what I've been struggling with for years. But it becomes, you get labeled as a complainer. Mm-hmm. And for me, I'm pretty stubborn. And so I didn't complain, and I just kept my nose to the grindstone and worked hard and just slept a lot and took over-the-counter medications and to help with other symptoms, and drank a lot of coffee, and just tried to self-medicate my way through my life. And it hit its limitations. That could only get you so far. And it really wasn't until I had kids that I really had the motivation to start getting more scientific in my approach to what I was doing, and start really, it was basically decided to apply my scientific background to my own health, which I had never really done up until that point. And that was when I was like, hey, I know a lot of sciencey things. Maybe I could figure out what's wrong with me. And it was still, from there, it was still a journey. It was still years before I really had, all of the answers, and kind of felt like I had all of my ducks in a row.
Mm-hmm. So when did you realize the importance of sort of the gut-immune connection?
So I came to the paleo diet from being really frustrated with my skin conditions. And, I was having a lot of joint pain, I was having a lot of migraines, I was generally feeling really miserable, but it was having this, badge on your skin that says, look, I am so unhealthy, I've got, clearly, right, skin is such a visible thing. It felt like I was wearing a big sign on my forehead that said, look how unhealthy I am, that I've got all this crazy skin stuff happening. And it was that brought me to the paleo diet initially, and I saw a lot of really great improvements. I went off 6 prescription medications within 2 weeks of starting the paleo diet. So I really became confident that I was on the right path. But I didn't see full resolution of all of my skin conditions. And so that brought me to starting to really dig deeper and really understand gut health, microbiome health, immune health, nutrient density, lifestyle in addition to diet. And it was, food quality was also part of that. You know, eating snow to tail was part of that discovery. And so it was something that came from having amazing and very rapid success following the paleo diet, but wanting more. So it was like the healthier I got, the higher I raised the bar. And that's something that has continued for the last 5.5 years on paleo and the Autoimmune Protocol. Is every time I you know, reach that next level of health, I go, and now I want more, right? And I want this, and I just keep chasing these health goals, and I keep setting them farther away. But it was that inspiring me to really dig into a lot of the science behind it. And then as I got into the science, it becomes really unequivocal. You go, well, I mean, clearly there's 20,000 studies showing that eating a lot of fiber from vegetables is really important for a healthy gut microbiome, which is really important for immune health and endocrine health and neurotransmitter health, and it impacts skin health and, you know, the stress axis, and oh my gosh, this is like super important, and here it all is in the scientific literature. So it became almost, I mean, really, well, it became my career, but it was much more steeped in science than I originally anticipated, and it had me digging through, I think, often very undervalued scientific studies that actually really give us a lot of insight. So sometimes it's like going through all these like obscure scientific journals and finding this one like super well designed study that answers this tiny piece of you know, this larger question. So I spend a great deal of time now, what I call the rabbit hole of PubMed, sort of digging through the scientific literature and following, you know, well, this study references this study, and then that references this one, and then, you know, this shows up with a related search term, and then I'm going to read this one. But that's how I've been able to piece together, I think, this bigger picture for sort of optimal diet and lifestyle choices for people with autoimmune disease. One of the things that is a limitation in science right now is, you know, that our advances in scientific discovery have gotten to the point where in research, the questions that need to be asked in order for us to continue and advance human knowledge and answer, you know, and answer questions, we have to get very, very narrow. And it's because we've just gotten so detailed. Like we've discovered all the big stuff, and now we're in that next layer of, you know, really detailed, you know, how does this chemical bind to this receptor in this, you know, cellular organelle, which then sets off this cascade that affects this. And so scientific studies have to be designed super, super narrowly in order to be able to answer a question effectively.
Right.
And there's no, you know, group of scientists who spend their time reading the science in these 7 fields that are somewhat related in order to start piecing together all of these individual little pieces of a puzzle. That doesn't exist right now. And so I find myself doing that. You know, the type of science that I read is much broader than what I was reading when I was actually doing medical research. And now I'll read, you know, papers from, you know, 20 different fields in order to piece together this one, you know, this one bigger picture. And it's, I think, a really important job that we kind of need to figure out how that can exist within the scientific community as well. And I think that when we can do that, it's going to be a lot easier to be able to translate science into actionable steps for the average person.
And that makes a lot of sense, and good for you for doing that work. It's important, but I think you're right. It's often neglected. So I also really like how you organized the Paleo Approach, and we've kind of hit on in an overview kind of way part 1, but I want to talk a little bit about part 2 called Aptly the Cure. And I wanted just to touch on the AIP protocol. I was wondering how you came to that, how you adapted the paleo diet for people with autoimmune disorders.
So I didn't invent the Autoimmune Protocol. It was something that, as I was starting my paleo journey, it was a term that already sort of existed within the sort of paleo sphere. Rob Wolf had a half-page, or maybe let's give him more credit, about 3/4 of the page in his first book, The Paleo Solution, that basically said, if you have autoimmune disease, here's this extra, 6 foods that need to be eliminated, and it included like alcohol and NSAID drugs. And then Lauren Cordain had on his website, because this was before Paleo Answer came out, he also had a little bit of extra about people with autoimmune disease and Paleo Answer. But on his website he had, if you have autoimmune disease, here's this extra list of foods that you need to avoid. And there was a good deal of overlap in those two lists, but they weren't actually identical lists. And then there was, I think, 1 or 2 other websites that had sort of merged those two lists into one, like, this is what the Autoimmune Protocol is, these additional eliminations. And when I was digging deeper, and it was very, very early on in my paleo journey, and deciding, I've discovered now that my skin conditions are autoimmune, I should do this autoimmune protocol. At that time, it was purely this list of additional eliminations with a little bit of rationale, but I wasn't about to cut these foods out of my diet without really understanding why. So I went to the scientific literature to really understand what was in these foods that was going to be a problem. And at the same time, Dr. Terry Wall's TEDx Iowa City talk went viral. And her talk was very much about nutrient density, and she was talking about her focus on nutrient density, following a paleo template that was very vegetable heavy, for getting herself out of a wheelchair, which she was in for secondary progressing multiple sclerosis. And so I was very influenced by her work. And so I started the paleo diet from I'm going to merge these two ideas of nutrient density and these additional eliminations as I dive into the science. And it definitely took a few months, but then I really finally started to see rapid improvement in my skin. And so I was writing about it on my website, and I would just take one piece of the topic and I would delve into it into more detail. And so what ended up happening was I was able to then bring in, it became like, how do these things affect the immune system? That became the question. So I was able to bring in this sort of snout to tail focus on organ meat. Terry Wall started with a focus on vegetables. I was like, there's these other really important nutrients that the immune system needs, and we get those from shellfish and seafood and organ meat. We need to be focusing on these two. I was able to bring in this, sleep's really important for how the immune system functions. Stress really undermines how the immune system works. And being active is really important, but avoiding overly strenuous, overtraining type activity was also really important. I was able to sort of merge these lifestyle factors as I was writing about it on my website, and as I was reading the science. And so what the Autoimmune Protocol then became was, I kind of consider myself the popularizer of it, because I took these, I think, really not very well fleshed out concepts that really came from Rob Wolf and Lauren Cordain having private communications, because I believe Rob's mother was dealing with autoimmune disease, and so they were trying to figure out what additional tinkering she needed to do. So I was able to take those sort of very surface concepts and bring in what we knew from other fields of research and flesh it out into a very comprehensive protocol. So it involves following a paleo diet with some additional eliminations, but even more important than that, it has this really strong nutrient density focus, because the immune system is a huge nutrient hub. It uses nutrient resources like no other system in the human body. And the first thing that happens when you are deficient in important resources for the immune system is it can't regulate itself very well. It can't turn itself off very well. So the most common nutrients that we're deficient in, things like zinc and vitamin A and vitamin D, are important for immune regulation, so important for resolving inflammation. And so I really pulled in this really strong nutrient focus into the Autoimmune Protocol. And then, really understanding, right, there are incredibly inflammatory compounds in tomatoes. And I don't think the amazing lycopene is enough to balance out how inflammatory they are, and they really don't work for the vast majority of people with autoimmune disease. So really diving into the science behind tomatoes and other vegetables from that family, eggs and sort of high allergen, high food sensitivity foods like eggs, nuts, and seeds, and really delving into gut health and why high vegetable intake is so important, both from a gut health perspective, a nutrient density perspective, and a phytochemical perspective. And so I was able to pull all those concepts together. So what you end up with is this very nutrient focused, right? The base of the diet is vegetables, seafood, organ meat, and then it's rounded out with other quality meats and fruit, and healthy fats, lots of herbs, and I was able to sort of create the science behind that framework and really explain why for people, and then pull in why getting enough sleep is important, why moving all day is important, why mitigating stress is super important, why connection and our social relationships is important for our immune system is functioning. And so, part one of the Paleo Approach is really about understanding the nitty-gritty of how high stress and not enough sleep and tomatoes and gluten and soy are contributing to the immune dysregulation that's happening in autoimmune disease. And then part two is really about, okay, well now what do we eat, and how do we get better sleep, and how do we manage stress? And, what is mindfulness practice? And oh my gosh, that really is supported by a huge body of scientific literature.
Right.
And really pulling it together in a very, the implementation, the practical, these are all the steps that we need to be working on. And it doesn't mean you have to do everything all at once, but here's all of the things that are inputs to the immune system that need to be tackled, whether you are a rip off the Band-Aid and just jump into a protocol kind of person, or if you're an implement it step-by-step kind of person.
Right.
So that's how that whole part of that book came about.
And I've used the protocol myself, and I like the chart as well, the 4-stage reintroduction chart, and the summary guides in the back of the book are very helpful as well. Now, I know you came out with a companion cookbook in 2014. I was wondering what inspired you to create that.
I had always intended on having an all-in-one resource, and I had wanted the Paleo Approach to have all of the science in it and then have a whole pile of recipes in it. And it's because, especially at that time, the amount of resources out there for people following the Autoimmune Protocol was very limited. There was virtually no prepackaged foods that, somebody following the Autoimmune Protocol could eat. It's very different now. Now you can have meal delivery services that are AIP, and you can keep, protein bars in your purse that are AIP. There's so many different things that we have that are amazing tools that just make it so much easier. But in 2014, it's not that long ago, there wasn't any of these things yet. And it was the biggest challenge for people was to look at the list of, people always look at the list of foods that you can't eat, and then they automatically feel like it's too hard, and they feel deprived. And I always like to focus on, that steak and salad meal that you really like that's AIP. You can completely do that. There's lots of wonderful familiar foods that we're used to eating that completely comply with the Autoimmune Protocol. But I wanted to help people actually cook this way in their homes, really focusing on nutrient density and food quality, and show everyone that food still gets to taste amazing. You still get to have joy from food, even following this more restrictive but very healing diet. So it became really important to create a resource for people that was, I've told the Paleo Approach was what to do, and now here's this great resource that'll help you actually get it done in your house. So it was something that I was working on the cookbook before the Paleo Approach was even finished. We figured out very early on that a Paleo Approach was going to be too big, and it just wasn't, we weren't physically going to be able to bind both of those books into one book.
Right.
So they had to be, a pair. But I was working on recipes for that, from the beginning of the project.
That's interesting. And in these recipes, I assume that you use yourself and at home.
So they were almost entirely inspired from just how I cook in my own house. I mean, there was a few recipes that were how I like to eat, but not necessarily how my family likes to eat, which is fine. And those are still, foods that when I cook them, it's like when there's leftovers to feed the kids. But it was really just about providing a really big diversity of different types of recipes. So there's everything from super, super simple for people who are not familiar with cooking at all. They've never cooked before. They're still learning. They need something just really easy. And then there's things that are really quite gourmet that are for the person who just really misses complex flavors and they feel very comfortable in the kitchen and they want to dig deeper into something that's going to be health promoting, but also, really, really super, super like gourmet and delicious. So there's kind of that whole range.
Yeah.
But of course, there's that whole range of people with autoimmune disease as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then in 2015, you came out with a second cookbook, The Healing Kitchen. So what was the backstory there?
So that book, it's funny because it's a more introductory book. So it's much more of a introduction to the Autoimmune Protocol. There's 100 pages of intro and science before we actually get into recipes. That is presenting the Autoimmune Protocol, not necessarily from its super detailed science perspective, but a little bit more common sense and a much sort of broad overview type approach to the explanations rather than nitty-gritty science. And then very, very focused on, practical resources, diagrams that help sort of summarize things really well, food lists, here's what you need. But then the recipes in that book were really designed to be extremely accessible. So they were designed to appeal to people who are transitioning to the Autoimmune Protocol from a typical standard American diet, rather than the Paleo Approach Cookbook. I think that the palate that it appeals to is much more people who are already doing some kind of healthy diet changes, whether it's paleo or primal ancestral. Maybe they come from a plant-based diet, but they're already they've already gotten rid of the junk food in their lives.
Right.
Whereas the Healing Kitchen is more for people who are like, I'm not doing this if I can't eat pizza. And the other criteria was that every ingredient had to be something that I could get at Walmart Superstore. So the idea was to make it very budget conscious and very accessible ingredients. So, in my normal day-to-day life, I cook with cassava flour a lot because it's an absolutely amazing, flour. It can do fantastic kitchen chemistry. It's very, very health-promoting choice for that type of cooking. But I didn't want to put that in this book because the only way you can get it right now is by ordering it online. And I just really wanted to appeal to people who don't have the time to cook, don't want to miss their favorite foods, don't want to spend more money on food, and just need things just quick and easy and cheap. So it was a very different approach to the recipes. So rather than, the Paleo Approach Cookbook was very much about here's a really optimal nutrition, right? I mean, each one of those recipes has the whole book, nutrition label that goes through not just all the normal things, but like all the essential vitamins and minerals. Right? It's like here's all the nutrients in this recipe, and that was not the focus of the Healing Kitchen. The Healing Kitchen is really about helping people transition to the Autoimmune Protocol and do it in a way that is as painless as possible.
Yeah, it sounds like you're filling another important need there. So before we go, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about your new online program, Go to Bed.
Yeah, so the whole rationale behind creating Go to Bed came from going on book tour and meeting people who were implementing the Autoimmune Protocol. And I would generally get, the amazing, thank you and success stories, and that's always very gratifying to hear, but there would always be a couple of people at every city who would come up and say, I've been doing the AIP for this long and this long and this long, and these are all the things that I eat, this is how well I'm doing it, and here's what I haven't achieved yet in terms of my health goals. Here's the struggles I'm still having. Here's what progress I have not seen yet. And, at first my question would be like, well, how's your stress? And I'd usually get an answer that was like, well, I've got a lot of stress in my life, but I make sure I go for a 30-minute walk every day, or I do yoga, or I meditate. It usually was like, yes, I'm stressed, but here's all the things that I'm trying to do to reduce my stress. Okay. So then my next question would be, how's your sleep? And invariably the person would burst into tears. And it became to the point where I started asking, how's your sleep first, before asking how your stress is. Because it was very clearly this major roadblock that some people were having to healing was sometimes it was just structuring their lives to get enough sleep, and sometimes it was sleep quality and just figuring out how to get good sleep when they are sleeping. And I realized just how easy it is, even for those of us who are, making these sometimes really hard changes in our lives to change our food, to heal. Right? We're changing where we shop, we're changing how we cook, we're cooking everything, we're making these huge, dedications to diet, we're spending more on food, right? Whatever it is. And we'll do everything else, and sleep still ends up being the last thing on the to-do list. It's the back burner. We go to bed after we've done all the other things, and however much time we have left to sleep, that's how much we sleep. And that is such a common thing in our society to just, sleep is optional, right? Or sleep is for the weak, or I'll sleep when I'm dead. We have all these phrases that we use to minimize the importance of sleep. Meanwhile, there's scientific studies that show that one night of bad sleep has a bigger impact on our insulin sensitivity than 6 months of bad diet. Sleep is absolutely profound in terms of its effect on the immune system, on our stress axis, on our gut health, on our endocrine health, on our neurological health. So when you're not sleeping well, you have food cravings, you have sugar and fat, high caloric food cravings, your hunger hormones are mismanaged, your stress responses are crazy, and we're just so used to not having it on our to-do list. So it became really important to create a comprehensive resource, not just for the autoimmune community, but for everybody, to help people understand why sleep is really important, how much sleep we really need, and what we can do during the day beyond just making ourselves go to bed and actually having a bedtime, which I think everybody needs a bedtime. That's non-negotiable, and we go to bed at a time, and it's ideally at least 8 hours before our alarm goes off in the morning. But beyond making it a priority, and that's why I include a lot of science about why sleep's important, is to help people make it a priority. But what are the really easy choices that we can make during the day that improve sleep quality? So it's not just about putting it back on the to-do list, but also now let's optimize that sleep. Let's make it the best quality sleep that we can get. And the program has been, so widely positively reviewed. It includes the over 350-page ebook, and then it's got a quick start guide and a whole pile of different printables of different really important charts from the book. So it's a huge thing, and it also has sleep broken down into a 14-day challenge for people who want to kind of take a step-by-step approach to it. Our bodies with sleep tend to respond better to gradual changes anyway, so it's sort of designed to let's tackle this bit by bit. But that was really designed to really highlight the importance of sleep and health for people and fill this hole in the resources, because we've got a lot now on how to eat, but food is just part of the equation. And when it comes to the immune system, our lifestyle is just as big an input, if not potentially a bigger input than how we're eating. And those are things in our lives that need attention as well.
Oh, absolutely. That is so important. And I had Dan Party on the show talk about Dan. Yeah, isn't he great? So we're definitely on the same page there. So I want to thank you so much, Sarah, for being on the podcast today. And
thank you. Thank you for having me.
oh, it's been such a pleasure. And listeners, you can find all of Sarah's books and her program Go to Bed and other resources on our website, the Paleo Mom, and I'll make the links available in the show notes. And next episode, we'll talk more in depth about leaky gut syndrome and the relationship with autoimmune conditions and the latest research. So stay tuned for that and have a great, happy, healthy week.